Welcome to this explainer. Look, if you follow crypto at all, you've almost certainly heard the mainstream media repeat this very comforting myth that quantum computers won't be able to break Bitcoin for decades. But today, we're going to use some hard empirical data to systematically dismantle that narrative. We're digging into newly published research from March 2026 that proves otherwise, and we're going to give you the honest, unvarnished answer that nobody else seems willing to give you.
Here's exactly how we're going to break this down today. First, we'll look at the 2026 quantum timeline. Second, the 6.9 million exposed Bitcoin. Third, the Satoshi wallet problem. Fourth, the migration delusion. And finally, we'll cover the native quantum solution.
All right, let's jump right into part one, the 2026 quantum timeline.
So, is your Bitcoin actually safe in 2026? You've definitely thought about this. The problem is the mainstream crypto media keeps feeding you the wrong answer by focusing on the lack of a threat right this second while completely ignoring the rapidly, and I mean rapidly, closing window of safety.
There is just a massive gap between the comforting echo chamber you hear online and the terrifying empirical data we have in front of us today. The media loves to dismiss it as science fiction, but the actual cryptographic reality, it points to a hardware capability threshold arriving somewhere between 2028 and 2032.
Get this. Research from Google, published in late March 2026 alongside Stanford and the Ethereum Foundation, mathematically proves that it takes fewer than 1,200 logical qubits to completely break Bitcoin's ECDSA encryption. That number is significantly, shockingly, lower than previous industry estimates.
To be even more clinically precise, a joint paper by Caltech and Atomic reveals that using neutral atom hardware actually drops the physical qubit requirement down to a highly accessible 10,000 to 26,000 qubits. And to put that into perspective, companies like Atom Computing already have over 1,200 neutral atom qubits functioning today. The gap to breaking Bitcoin is closing at breakneck speed.
And here is the absolute most crucial thing you need to understand. The death of ECDSA is not a prediction. We are talking about settled cryptographic mathematics from back in 1994. Shor's algorithm, running on a capable quantum computer, will fundamentally crack the elliptic curve cryptography that secures your Bitcoin. It is absolutely not a matter of if, but entirely a matter of hardware scaling. So this creates a highly verifiable, accelerated timeline where Q-Day arrives in mere years, not decades. In fact, Google actually took their own findings so seriously that they moved their internal post-quantum migration deadline all the way up to 2029. They know for a fact that the 2028 to 2032 window is the new reality. Okay, moving on to part two, the 6.9 million exposed Bitcoin. Right now, literally today, 6.9 million Bitcoin, which is about 34% of the total circulating supply, already have publicly exposed ECDSA keys. This creates an immediate scenario we call harvest now, decrypt later. Adversaries can simply copy the public ledger today, stick it on a hard drive, and just wait for quantum hardware to mature enough to decrypt those private keys.
Now, your personal risk level depends entirely on the specific address formats that are holding your assets. If you hold coins in a Genesis-era P2PK address, your full public key is permanently embedded on-chain, meaning your risk is critical. If you've ever spent from a standard P2PKH address, your public key is exposed, putting you at high risk. It's really only the unspent modern addresses like P2WPKH SegWit formats that offer a temporary low-risk hiding spot.
Which brings us perfectly to part three, the Satoshi wallet problem.
Think about Satoshi Nakamoto's stash for a second. An estimated 1.1 million Bitcoin are permanently locked in structurally exposed P2PK addresses from way back in 2009. We are talking about roughly $74 billion in value, and those public keys have been sitting right there in plain sight for over 15 years.
The literal second Q-Day arrives, those dormant coins become mathematically derivable. And listen, even if your personal wallet is perfectly migrated and safe, the sudden unexpected movement of 1.1 million Bitcoin that hasn't budged since 2009 would trigger a catastrophic market shock. It would shatter trust in the entire ecosystem overnight.
Let's dive into part four, the migration delusion.
So, a lot of people ask, why not just hard fork and upgrade? Well, retrofitting quantum resistance onto a classical chain is essentially an emergency response plan that's completely doomed to fail. You would need to achieve near-impossible community consensus, somehow force every single user on Earth to manually migrate their funds to new addresses, and then figure out what to do with the millions of coins in lost or dormant wallets that simply cannot be migrated.
Furthermore, if you tried to force these giant post-quantum signatures into legacy blocks, you'd create massive state bloat. These new NIST-approved MLDSA signatures are roughly 3,600% larger than traditional ECDSA signatures. Shoving them into the Bitcoin network would choke bandwidth, explode node storage requirements, and drive transaction fees absolutely through the roof. It's what the industry calls a fat ledger crisis.
But honestly, here is the most terrifying part. Even if you attempt to manually migrate your coins right before a Q-Day hits, a fast-clock quantum computer can actually hijack your transaction in real time. While your migration transaction sits unconfirmed in the public mempool, which inherently exposes your key, the quantum machine derives your private key in minutes, signs a competing transaction with a much higher fee, and just steals your funds before your migration ever even confirms.
Finally, let's look at Part 5, the native quantum solution. Since a retroactive patch is pretty much a structural impossibility, a native post-quantum architecture like Qubit is the only mathematically sound solution left. Look, you cannot build a fireproof house on a floor made of paper. Native chains are built on NIST standardized quantum-resistant algorithms right from the Genesis block, meaning they have absolutely zero legacy ECDSA exposure.
For instance, Qubit Chain uses those NIST-approved MLDSA standards for all of its signatures. Because MLDSA is based on highly complex lattice math rather than elliptic curves, Shor's algorithm literally has no attack path against it. It renders the quantum threat completely useless, regardless of whether a machine has 1,000 qubits or 4 million.
So what you get is a completely zero-trust, quantum-immune infrastructure that doesn't inherit a messy 15-year migration timeline. By utilizing FIPS 204 for signatures, FIPS 203 for secure channels, and true quantum random number generation for keys, this architecture is completely immune to both harvest now, decrypt later tactics and those real-time mempool attacks we talked about.
So I'll leave you with this final empirical reality. The clock is ticking, the blockchain data is permanent, and the choice to migrate to native safety is ultimately yours. With Q-Day approaching much, much faster than the mainstream admits, the only question left is, what will you do with your exposed assets before that threshold is crossed? Thanks for joining this explainer, and definitely stay informed out there.